We ready? Okay, I just want to thank everybody, both the public and staff, Forest Service, for joining us tonight. This is the 21 Smith River Park State Park River Corridor Management Plan update. The purpose of the meeting is to provide as much information as we can to the public, so that if there's questions, we can answer them tonight. The one thing that tonight is not doing is here for public comment, and that'll be clarified some more as we move on. The Smith River Plan was put in place in 2009, and it's time to update it. And as we went through and looked at the issues related to the Smith River, 4 of the main ones popped up, and that was management of Camp Baker, human waste management within the corridor, natural and cultural resource impacts and protection of those resources, and floater opportunity. And those will be discussed in detail as we move forward by our park manager, Colin Moss, in part of the presentation. Again, the objective of the meeting is for the public to get as much information as we can give them, so that if you have questions on process or the topics presented tonight, you have an opportunity to ask those questions and get answers. I'd like to let the public know that we have people here from our information division, parks, our park board, fisheries, our director's office, folks for tribal relations from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I, as Gary Bertolotti, the regional supervisor, and then the U.S. Forest Service. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dave Hagengruber, our information officer, to give us some details on the logistics of the meeting. And again, thank you and welcome. Enjoy, and then take it from there, Dave.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Thanks also again, everybody who's on board with us here. What we're, like Gary already said, tonight is an informational session. It's really a chance. It's a great chance to literally have one-on-one feedback with some of the park staff and the people who are involved in this plan. We have one session tonight. We'll have another one on December 7th. So it'll be the same format. We just wanted to have 2 opportunities for the people who weren't able to join us tonight. And for anybody who's not able to join on either night, like we've already discussed, this is being recorded, and this will be posted on our website, where we have all the information that's currently going on with the Smith River there. So this is what's known as a Zoom webinar. So it's not the same as a Zoom meeting where everybody has open mic and ability to all talk at the same time. What we plan to do with this one is do our informational portions at the beginning, and then open it up for question and answer with a pretty good block of time, about 45 minutes at the end. So, and again, the thing to stress is that's question and answer. And what I wanted to show before I'm done is how we're taking public comments, because public comments are really, that's the point we're after right now. We have a few more weeks for public comment, about 2 more weeks to go, where we're accepting public comment on this. And we're doing those in writing on our website. So here's our technology bump. I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and hopefully I can show. We should have a picture right now of the FWP website, I hope. Have we got that? Anybody, we got that up there?
It's there.
It's great. All right, so if you're on, to get to the section for the Smith River, the main FWP website, which is just simply fwp.mt.gov. From that page, if you scroll down past the picture that looks like Lewis and Clark Caverns, a candlelight tour, go down just a little bit, and you come to the series of boxes here, everything from muzzleloader hunting to elk season. And over on the side, you can bring it over a little bit, it's the Smith River State Park box. And if you click on that, it takes you to the page where I'm sure most people probably went to get the login information. If you're logged on here and participating in this webinar, you've probably already seen this page. If you scroll a little ways down here, the things on this page, the old management plan from 2009 is there. The environmental assessment for the 2021 update is there to download and read. Information for the public meetings this week. Next week's will be posted in a day or two. We didn't want to put two Zoom information items up there at once to make it confusing. And when these are done, this is also where the recordings will be housed. So you can come here and get a link that'll take you to the FWP YouTube page where this entire thing will be available to rewatch over and over again for anybody who feels like doing that. To actually make the public comments, if you scroll down towards the bottom of that page, there's two ways that we accept comments. One is the electronic version, which is right over the website. The other, scroll a little bit farther down and it shows you can submit them by mail directly to Cayenne, who's kind of facilitating this meeting. If you want to write out your comments, print them out, you can send those, you can mail those to her. The easiest way though is to jump right up to the public comment opportunity on this page. The deadline is still there, December 15th. And if you work through that, you can put in your name and information if you'd like to, it's optional. But then below number 2, it just says you can write your comments here on the Smith River Management Plan. So, and the way that I would suggest doing that would be to talk, with a little heading about whether it's the solid waste or floater opportunity or whichever segment you wish to comment on. Make note of that and then put your comments below that and then move on to the next one. It'll be easier for the people who have to tease out those comments and try and compile all those later on for review to pull them out that way. So it's pretty simple. We've gotten a good number of comments already, and I expect in the next 2 weeks we'll get a substantial amount more. But this has worked well for some other season-setting things that we're in the middle of right now and did earlier this fall with the same style meeting. So again, I guess thanks to everybody for joining us here, and I will see if I can figure out how to turn off my screen sharing and give it back to Cayenne.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. And I too am going to try to tackle technology here as I speak. So what I'd like to do actually as we get started is just to kind of walk through a little bit, now that you've heard how to submit your comments, just wanted to the reason we wanted to emphasize this is just to remind people how to kind of do that. We're really going to use this time to try to address questions that you all might have as we go. And so we'll leave a little bit of time at the end of our program tonight to be able to do that. So before we kind of jump into things, I wanted to spend a little time too to just kind of walk through how we anticipate using our time. We're going to first talk a little bit about just a lot of the work that we have accomplished both internally and then with kind of working with some of our sounding board members, advisory groups and others. Just a lot of different things that we've done to be able to get to this point of issuing our environmental assessment. And so talk a little bit about that. Cullen Moss, our park manager for the Smith River, is going to do some more explicit presentation on kind of just what we're up to and why we're thinking about some of these issues, kind of how we selected them, and then what our preferred alternatives are for each of those management topics that some of you may have already read through. And then we've left about 30 to 40 minutes in terms of allowing you to be able to ask some questions. Sorry, Charlie, did you have something to add?
Yeah, hi, Cayenne. It looks like on my screen, at least, we're looking at your, it's not the slideshow view.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So again, I think what I wanted to do is just touch on a few things here in terms of things that we have done. Of course, the management plan for the Smith River now, as some of you are aware, is about 12 years old. And as outdoor recreation here in Montana is growing and changing swiftly in a lot of our sites, parks, fishing access sites, even some of our wildlife management areas, we are seeing a need to look at a lot of different recreation management issues in order to really uphold our important mission of conserving and protecting our cultural and natural resources. In order to kind of do some of this work, we did really a horizontal review of a lot of what had happened with our management plan in the past. And we really tried to identify some of the core things that we felt were the most pressing needs. And I mentioned that only to suggest that these are continual processes. These planning processes are ones that have a lot of different aspects to them. And so though we're going to talk about 4 kind of core buckets of work right now, it's not to say that in the future we wouldn't come back to also address other issues. And I know even in my brief review of some of the comments that have come in, there have been some suggestions of other things that we might look at. And so just want to offer that, we've tried to do our best job. What you've seen in the environmental assessment now are simply proposals based on some of the internal work that we've done. And in order to do this, we organized what is called a planning and advisory group. And so we have a select number of folks who have joined us from the past Smith River advisory group. We have others who are interested citizens. We have some landowners. We have representation from the outfitters. And so we really tried to formulate a diverse group that would offer us some perspectives as we started to weigh issues and understand kind of what were some of the priorities that we should identify and work on first. And so I wanted to just share with you, some of you may have already seen this on our website. These are the members, and I know that we've got a couple online here with us. I wanted to also offer up to Mary Moe, who happens to also be one of our Parks and Outdoor Recreation board members, just the chance to weigh in kind of representation of the PAC group, as we're calling you all, and just talk maybe a little bit about some of the discussions, just so everybody can understand a little bit of kind of where we've been over the course of these last months.
Thank you, Kyan. And thank you, people, for showing your interest in this really treasure of the treasure state. We have been meeting as a group for, I don't know how many sessions we've had, perhaps 3 or 4, full day long, very energetic discussions with 2 main themes emerging from them. One, a concern that not everybody that loves the Smith gets to take advantage of it, and how can we increase access? And 2, maybe we're loving it to death. And so we have had difficult conversations, and I think have arrived at some proposals and some conclusions that we think need to go to the public. But undergirding all of that is a strong bond among all of us of appreciation for the Smith River itself. It truly is such an amazing asset for Montana, and we want to make sure that it continues to be as beautiful as it is now, and perhaps even more so. So that's the intent behind all of the discussion that you're going to hear. And I look forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Mary. I also wanted to call upon my colleague and friend, Quinn Kuka, who has helped us with addressing some of the key tribal representatives and groups that are also just very much interested in this planning process. So Quinn, are you there, and would you like to say anything about some of the discussions you've had?
Hi guys, welcome. Yeah, I reached out to multiple tribes to get in touch with how they would like to be part of this. A lot of them have shown interest. They look forward to things depending on what what we take and what action we take. And then they kind of will insert themselves as needed or withdraw as needed. And so all of them currently that I've talked to, there was about 13 of them, have showed an interest and have explained why they'd be in the area and why they would want their voices to be heard. And FWP is taking a role right now where we want them at the table and their voices to be part of our discussion. So it's pretty exciting. This is kind of a new thing.
Thank you so much, Quinn. So again, we've already conducted a lot of internal work. We've conducted some outreach as well to others. And I just wanted to create a little bit of a footprint in terms of what we see as kind of some next steps following the conclusion of our comment period and the release of a final decision notice. And so this comment period, I will say, as the planner for Parks and Recreation for FWP, is really instrumental in all that we do. Your input is very, very important to us, and we appreciate the feedback. I know that many of us have already benefited from some of the comments that we've seen come in. They've been very thoughtful, and these are complex issues. These are not easy decisions, as many of you probably can understand. And so just really want to thank everybody who has already commented, and then just hopefully inspire others who have not to please meet our deadline by the 15th. We're going to convene the Planning Advisory Committee once again in what we anticipate mid-January timeframe, to be able to then put in front of them kind of a re-release of our environmental assessment. So in other words, we are going to take the comments that we receive and incorporate those to create kind of a final document. And then with that, we anticipate issuing a final decision notice for the EA and the management plan update. I wanted to turn it over to Charlie Sperry just very briefly, who has been kind of my co-facilitator in a lot of this planning process. And I know he's not a stranger to many of you, just to talk a little bit about the role of rulemaking and administrative issues that come into play, just so folks have kind of an understanding of some of those aspects as well. Charlie?
Yeah, thanks, Cayenne. It's a fairly simple explanation. What we're working on now is the Montana Environmental Policy Act requirement, and that's the EA. Once the decision notice is issued by the department, there could be some things in that decision notice that to actually implement them, we'd need to go through an administrative rulemaking process, and that's where the Parks and Recreation Board part of it kicks in. So in a nutshell, there's proposals that could be implemented in 2022 that don't require rulemaking. The proposals that do require rulemaking, however, would go through a second process, the calendar year 2022, and then ultimately those would probably go into place in the float season 2023. Thanks, Cayenne.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. So moving right along, you heard from Gary as he opened our session that there has been really kind of a small village here in terms of looking at kind of how we address these issues and poise them in terms of developing the environmental assessment. And so here is a list. Of course, by sharing this, I always fear that I'm missing somebody, but I think I have everybody, at least from the FWP team. That said, we've also been working very closely with our friends and colleagues from the Forest Service. They're instrumental partners since the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest, of course, is very much involved in some of these issues. And I think I saw Carol and Bobby here on the line. Carol or Bobby, did you want to add anything before we continue to move on?
I have nothing. Thank you.
The same for me.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Well, super. So what I might do is then turn it over to my friend and colleague, Colin Moss, who has done a lot of this work. Many of you know him. He, in many ways, is the face and the voice behind the Smith River and has been for a while. So he's going to spend a little time to just talk about kind of what we've been up to and more importantly, why. I think it's really important to also understand some of the rationale for kind of how we've gotten to this point. So Colin, I might turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you, Cayenne. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's tuning in tonight. Thanks for taking the time out to join us. I think maybe to start off, as I go through, as was mentioned by Gary and Cayenne, I'm going to be kind of reviewing the issues that we're going to be looking at that are in the environmental assessment. And when I do that, I'm going to go through all 4 of the issues first. And then at the end, then we'll open it up to public comment. So I've got about 25 to 30 minutes. So I may be a little high level. I'll try not to get into too much detail to try to keep it a little high level. So with that, I think we'll begin. So as Cayenne mentioned, why are we here tonight? What are we doing and why? And again, just to reiterate, we're seeking public input on this environmental assessment, or EA for short, that looks at potential updates to the 2009 Smith River State Park and River Corridor Management Plan. And as was noted earlier, the current plan that we're operating under was approved in 2009, and that plan replaced the 1997 plan. And so we began that process in approximately 2007. So it was about a 2-year process. And we pretty much revamped the 1997 plan. And so this current 2009 plan that we're operating under, it's many of the decisions and direction in the plan are still pretty relevant today. It's a pretty good plan, pretty solid. However, we did realize and recognize that there were some issues that we needed to revisit and reevaluate. And so that's what we did. We pulled out specific issues and decided, rather than reinventing the wheel, we didn't need to do that. We just needed to probably just do a simple update to some of those more pressing issues. So again, what we're doing here tonight is we're reminding folks that the EAA is out for public comment, and we have until December 15th to submit comments, and we hope you do if you haven't already. Growing interest in use. Ever since the Smith River was permitted in 1991, obviously as the years have gone on, there's been a growing interest in obtaining a permit to float, and there's been an increase in the amount of use on the Smith River. And we really noticed this for the last 5 years. From 2017 to 2020, we really kind of saw a spike in both the interest in obtaining a permit and the numbers of people actually floating the river. Just real quick on this slide, it might be a little difficult to see, but in the upper left-hand corner, that graph is showing the average number of private floaters per group. And that's for private floaters. And so basically that's looking at a 10-year span from 2011 to 2020. And within that graph, there are plots that show the average group size for those years of 2011 through 2020. And then you'll see a black dotted line, and that black dotted line is a trend line. So that is showing the trend of use. And so as you'll notice, it's trending upwards from left to right. So the steeper the slope of that trend line, the greater the amount of increase in use. And so, from 2011 to 2020, roughly basically what you're seeing there is, if you look at the left-hand end of that dotted line and the right-hand end, and look at where those numbers lie, in about the past decade, we've increased use on the Smith River, average group size of private groups by about 1.5 people per group. And, I'll mention that to the folks, and sometimes people will say, well, boy, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, 1.5 people per group. But when you consider the cumulative effects of, anywhere between 7 and 9 private groups floating per day, that can be anywhere between 7 and 12 people per day in increase. And then over the course of the season, that really can have some noticeable effects on the overall total use that we see on the Smith River. So there again, both the interest in obtaining a permit and this increase in use is having a noticeable effect or an impact to both our natural and cultural resources. And this growing interest and use is really directly related to the 4 issues I'll discuss this evening. So the 2021 draft environmental assessment, or EA for short. As you can see on each one of these slides at the bottom, there's the address to the Smith River State Park website where you can take a look at the environmental assessment. You can submit comments, as Dave Hagengruber had noted, either electronically, or there's the information on how to submit them via mail. And essentially, the issues that we'll be looking at, as Gary had mentioned, are as such: management of Camp Baker, human waste management, natural and cultural resource impacts, and floater opportunities. And so if you haven't already had a chance to take a look at the draft environmental assessment, kind of the format for those issues is the first part will be a discussion in the issue discussion section where we talk about, okay, here's the issue, here's why it's an issue, here's some information, here's some statistics and numbers. And then next after that, we'll have a paragraph that describes the current conditions of that issue. And then next will be our desired conditions for that individual issue. And then we have drafted some alternatives, including a preferred alternative. And you'll see that. And then last but not least is basically kind of the meat and potatoes of an environmental assessment where we're evaluating the impacts of the preferred alternative on both the physical environment and the human environment. Next slide. So this is our first issue, management of Camp Baker. Just real quickly, this slide is I believe I took this photo in mid to late May of either 2018 or 2019. I forget the exact year, but this is a fairly typical scene of Camp Baker once we kind of get into our peak season. You know, kind of a tent city in that little grassy island in the middle of the photo. And then also there's some camping that occurs on the other side of the road there on the right-hand side of the photo. And then, you know, kind of our vehicle parking in the foreground of that photo. We also have an overflow parking lot to the right of this photo up the road a ways when we fill up this parking area. So this is fairly typical, what you'll see at Camp Baker on any given day throughout the season. You can go ahead and switch to the next slide. Thank you. And so there again, you know, 15, 20 years ago, if you would have asked me, hey, Colin, how's it working, accommodating both day use and overnight camping at Camp Baker? How's the site looking? I would have said, you know, it's working pretty well. We're able to accommodate it. But as the years have gone on and the average group sizes have increased, the numbers of people have increased, the numbers of people camping has increased, we've really started to notice a lot of congestion and crowding and natural and potentially cultural resource impacts occurring at Camp Baker. Part of the issue is what I just mentioned, but also, you know, Camp Baker's a really pretty small site, and it doesn't have a really large footprint. And as time has gone on and we're seeing more and more people, more vehicles with trailers, more people camping overnight, and trying to balance that day use, in other words, you know, having people stage and launch to get on the Smith River, along with overnight camping kind of in the same general area, has become quite challenging. And there again, with the resources, you know, the site was really never designed properly years ago. And so, you know, people have been able to kind of drive wherever they kind of wanted to. We didn't really have properly hardened areas for parking. So that's part of the reason we're seeing some of these impacts that we're seeing. Most of it's loss of vegetative cover, rutting when it gets wet, and then along with that, the crowding. And so with that, I'll quickly just mention what happened in 2020 and 2021. Obviously, everybody's aware of, you know, early 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit us. You know, we were all in the department kind of trying to determine, boy, how are we going to handle this? Can we can we accommodate camping? Can we have our parks and our fishing access sites and WMAs open? And obviously in the Smith River, we were no different. So, you know, we ended up closing the river for a short period of time, well, for the whole month of April through May 4th, until we could come up with a plan to say, well, how can we accommodate floating on the Smith River in a safe way, both safe for the public and safe for our staff, and to, you know, follow the mandates of social distancing. And of course, at that time, I think the thought was that the virus could also be spread through surfaces. And so we came up with a contingent plan. The contingent plan was we'll close overnight camping at Camp Baker, and we'll register groups over the phone, including payment. And so that's what we did. And then when groups arrived, we did a random number generator to determine the order that we would call people, and that would determine the order of the registration, of course, including their boat camp registration. And then when they arrived at Camp Baker, we would instruct them over the phone prior to say, okay, when you arrive at Camp Baker, just try to make sure you find an area in the grassy island or just outside of it to kind of get set up and to stage. And then at some point, the ranger will come out and then they'll hand you a Ziploc packet with all the information that you need, including your boat tags and your maps and your floater log and a copy of your registration and your credit card receipt. And then they would get the brief Smith River Ranger orientation talk, leave no trace, safety orientation talk. And then when one of the 2 boat launches was available, they were available to launch. And you know, it was kind of a working experiment. It really showed us during those 2 seasons that it actually worked pretty darn well. It worked really smooth, not only for the department and my river rangers. It was much more efficient for them, but it seemed to be much more efficient for the general public as well, including the commercial outfitters. We got a lot of really good comments from both, including, I believe, all 7 of our outfitters. The local community was very supportive of it, including the county commissioners and several businesses in White Sulphur Springs. And so it seemed to work really well. So what is the desired condition of this issue? I think we may have to go back a slide or forward. Get caught up. Pardon me here. So there again, with all that said, the desired condition for management of Camp Baker will be to manage it to best accommodate floaters and provide for safe and efficient flow of traffic through the site, while also protecting the important natural and cultural resources. And so our preferred alternative, for the sake of time, I may not read through all the alternatives. In this case, there's only 3, so I think I will. So alternative A would be no action. In other words, we would return to the way we used to do things, where we allowed overnight camping at Camp Baker while registering groups and assigning boat camps on site. Alternative B would be returning to overnight camping. However, we would continue to register groups either via phone or online if that becomes available in the future. But our preferred alternative, alternative C, is to go ahead and manage Camp Baker for day use only and continue to register groups and assign boat camps via phone or online. Why is this our preferred alternative? There again, for a lot of the things I just mentioned, it would reduce congestion and crowding at Camp Baker, would hopefully improve the experience for folks where they won't feel crowded and congested. Reducing, the natural and cultural resource impacts that we're seeing down there. It was very well received by the public. And then a caveat I'll put onto this too, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read the EA, is that we did recognize during those 2 seasons that when we did close Camp Baker, that we did have some displacement, obviously, of people who like to camp in the local area and on other public lands. And in this case, I think most of the overnight camping that occurred on public lands actually occurred on fishing access sites on both Fort Logan and the Newland Creek fishing access sites. And then some folks stayed in town, some folks drove from home, et cetera. But we did recognize that there would be some displacement with that Next slide. Human waste management. These are just a photo of actually that's me on the left there, being a human measuring stick after we dug a pretty deep toilet. However, I'm only 5'7", so I don't know if that tells us if that's a shallow or a deep hole there. And then the right photo there is just a group of volunteers. It was a River Management Society trip that we did several years ago, helping out to do some work in the boat camps, and there we're digging a pit toilet. You can go to the next slide. It was on or around about 1983 when Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the United States Forest Service, as partners, or important partner, began digging pit latrines. And from my calculations, we keep fairly detailed patrol logs that my river rangers keep when they go down, and pretty much all the work that they do, they keep track of. And so we keep track of how many pit latrines that we dig. And from my calculations, from 1983 to this year, we've probably dug well over 1,200 pit latrines during that 38-year time period. Some of the biggest issues with the pit latrines are obviously the natural and potentially cultural resource impacts that digging holes can cause. Those natural impacts, obviously the impacts to the soil and the vegetation, potential cultural impacts. We could be disturbing, rock circles that we're unaware of, lithic scatter, which is rock debris from making stone tools, or even human remains. And we're not aware that we've disturbed anything up to this point, but as for all the years and all the different staff I've had over the years, there's a good possibility we have, and we just, as not professional archaeologists, we just maybe didn't recognize it. So, and then another issue with the pits that has been, really seeming to grow the last probably 5, 6, 7 years, as we're literally running out of places in some of those boat camps to dig pit latrines, just based on the fact that we're required to keep those pit latrines out of the 100-year floodplain. Many of them are up on high, rocky, steep, timbered slopes where there's not a whole lot of great locations, suitable locations to dig those, where it's flat and we have soils that aren't just solid rock underneath about 6 inches of topsoil. And so what essentially happens oftentimes is we're forced to redig in some old pit holes. And you can only imagine, sometimes, as the years go on, we just don't know how long some of those old holes have been sitting there. And sometimes we'll start digging in an old hole, and lo and behold, we get 6 to 8 inches down, and we do run into human waste that's not fully decomposed. And then we have to stop, rebury that, and start and find another location. So, it's, what was it? The other thing I was going to mention, just, the health and sanitation of the pit latrines probably isn't the best when you have multiple people using those. The time and labor that it takes for my river rangers to dig those when they could probably be utilizing their time in other ways. They would be a little more proactive and productive. So anyway, with that, our desired condition for human waste management on the Smith River would be human waste disposal would be managed with a long-term stewardship approach that we would be guided by some principles. And there again, just to reiterate, reducing the impacts and the disturbance to the soil, vegetation, and cultural resources. Potential contamination of water resources. That's an issue. Something that we're concerned about. Again, reducing the risk to public health, and also, whatever we come up with for a solution, and we'll get to that here shortly, is that it would minimize the impacts, or the effects maybe is a better word, to the floating public and to adjacent landowners. Next slide. So for human waste management, basically we had 2 alternatives. Alternative A, which is simply no action. In other words, we would continue utilizing the pit latrines. Our preferred alternative B, would be a mandatory human waste pack out using self-contained toilet systems with disposal at or near the Eden Bridge takeout. Again, why is this our preferred alternative? Well, there again, for a lot of the things that I just mentioned, natural and cultural resource impacts, health and sanitation, time and labor. And, I believe, the Smith River, at least in the lower 48 states, we are the last river, I think, to have a full 100% pit toilet system that's still in operation. And at this time and at this day and age, it is kind of the industry, it is the industry standard in the United States for river recreation management. Okay, next slide. Natural and cultural resource impacts. Just for context, real quick again, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. What you're looking at on this slide in that left-hand photo there, that's a photo of Middle Table Rock Boat Camp, which is located about river mile 33 and a half, looking downstream. And that's depicting, you can kind of see some of the impacts that we're experiencing on our stream banks in the boat camp landings. Sloughing, erosion, loss of vegetative cover, really not any vegetative cover, including willows to kind of help protect and stabilize that stream bank. And then the right-hand photo there, what you're seeing there, I believe that is Upper Trout Creek Boat Camp. And that was a few years ago when we had some ice flows and ice jams. And every few years we will have those in different sections of the river. But really what this is trying to dictate or show is that in the early season, basically late March through a good chunk of April, the Smith River in the boat camps is often still very saturated with water. A lot of some of the soil is still frozen a few inches down. It's saturated, it hasn't drained, the vegetation hasn't really taken root. And so a lot of that early season use is having some real impacts, noticeable impacts on the vegetation and, causing some of that riverbank sloughing and erosion and rutting. In this case, this was an ice flow that occurred and you can see the blocks of ice, the remnants of that ice jam still on the banks of the landing of the camp there. And the river rangers are simply replacing all the tie-off posts and I believe the boat camp sign that got sheared off by that ice flow. Next slide. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, as the years have gone on, we're really seeing an increasing amount of natural and potential cultural resource degradation of both the stream banks of the boat camp landings and also the boat camps themselves, with this increased use of foot traffic and early season use. What are some of these resource impacts we're seeing? Well, I mentioned one earlier, the sloughing and eroding riverbanks, loss of vegetative cover, soil erosion, soil compaction, tree root exposure, and loss and or damage to cultural resources. It's important to note that there are things that we can do to help mitigate some of these resource impacts, and what we typically call those are recreation ecology measures. And so those are simple things that don't require specific rulemaking. We can implement those anytime. And those would be such things as something that's called site hardening. What site hardening is typically bringing in materials like gravel or wood chips, for example, to lay down in some of the areas that are denuded of vegetation to kind of help reduce the mud and the rutting and the erosion. Things like building rock steps to, especially at the boat camp landings, to try to help basically funnel traffic in specific areas and focus our impacts in specific areas, so we don't have, several yards of riverbank where we have multiple impacts occurring. Other things include defining boundaries of our core kitchen areas, our core camping or tenting areas, or tent pads they're sometimes called, or of just defining the boundary of the camp themselves to kind of prevent what's called pioneering, or that those sites growing in size with the loss of vegetative cover. What often happens is an old tent site that somebody maybe used 10 or 15 years ago may start to become denuded of vegetation. When it's wet, it becomes muddy. So people are like, I don't want to set my tent up in a mud hole. So I'm going to go to this nice grassy, pristine area over here. And then eventually the same thing happens there as time goes on. That gets denuded of vegetation, and those sites tend to migrate and grow in size. Other things that we can do are active or passive revegetation measures, where we actually go in and reseed areas. Those types of measures would typically involve what we call rest rotation, or at least resting, where we would, if we felt it was a prescription that was needed for a specific site, we could maybe rest it for just a specific time of the year, like the early season. If it's a site that's very vulnerable to early season use, that gets a lot of use, and it also tends to be very wet and vulnerable to those impacts of trampling in the early season. Or it could be a case where we actually close a camp for a year or two and do some active revegetation and some of these other recreation ecology measures in that site to help get it back looking a little bit better and more resilient. However, we've recognized that these recreation ecology measures are great things that we can do and utilize and implement, but they do require a lot of staffing, a lot of work, and they do require time to see results. And so we would likely need to also implement some additional management actions to address some of these natural and cultural resource impacts. And when I say additional management actions, typically what that means are things that we as an agency would do to recognize those impacts. So they would typically be from less restrictive to more restrictive. And we would have management prescriptions that would have goals, objectives, desired conditions, and standards, and things that we can measure. And so just real quickly, I just wanted to touch on that briefly. You can get a lot more detail if you take a look at that issue in the environmental assessment. So there again, desired conditions are natural and resource conditions at the boat camps and the associated boat landings are consistent with the direction that's provided to us in the Smith River Management Act that dictates us to protect the integrity of the river's water and canyon resources for future generations. Our preferred alternative, there again, create a system of incentives to promote smaller group sizes throughout the season, close the river to floating for a given time period during the early spring season, and reallocate only a portion of canceled permits during the peak season. And it's important to note that we would also implement one or more of the recreation ecology measures with this preferred alternative E. Why, again, is this our preferred alternative? Well, it'll allow us the ability to implement a suite of management actions based upon the present conditions of those sites and camps. These actions would help to reduce resource impacts while employing modest restrictions to floater opportunities. And there again, we could choose to implement some or all of these actions, again, based on a model that's called adaptive management that would allow us to adapt if things that we tried weren't working, we could change that up a little bit and have some adaptation built into that. Next slide. Last but not least is floater opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, interest in floating the river continues to increase at a significant rate. You could probably switch to the next slide, Kellyanne. Permits have increased by about 146% over the past 10 years and nearly 166% over the past 16 years. And this past year, 2021, we did have a record number of 15,160 applicants. And this graph that you see on the screen here is pretty telling. We just had a sharp spike and increase in the number of applicants. So there again, the desired condition, what we're really looking for is, well, of course, what this tells us is that, okay, well, I was hearing this probably over 15 years ago already, when we were only having between 4,000 and 5,000 applicants, that people were telling me, gee, gosh, Colin, it's getting really difficult to draw a permit. And I say, yeah, it is, but boy, it's since that time, it's about tripled in the number of applicants we have. So obviously what that equates to is it's harder and harder to draw a permit, especially a peak season permit. And so there again, our desired condition would be, we would like to see individuals who have been unsuccessful at drawing a permit and or who have not recently floated the river would have additional opportunities to either acquire a permit or float as part of another person's permit. And so our preferred alternative would be to explore development of a system to increase floater opportunities for unsuccessful permit applicants and others who have not recently or ever floated the Smith River. Again, why is that our preferred alternative? Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, simply that it's becoming increasingly difficult to obtain a permit, and most notably during that peak season. And that's all I have. I hope I didn't go too far over. And with that, I will turn it over to Cayenne. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Colin. So we're now at a point where we're gonna open up our session to some Q&A. And so what I'd like to do actually is, just before we get started with that, give a couple prompts to folks who maybe are new to the system. So if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand, and you can do that by dialing *6 and then star 9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute. My colleague Linnea is going to be looking to call on folks here to be able to address the questions that we might have. I would like to encourage you all to just, if you do have comments, please use the commenting online form that Dave was able to walk through with everybody. I recognize we all have a passion for this treasured resource, and just want to hope that, inspire you all to just please kind of be as concise as possible. So when you do ask your question, please just state your full name, let us know where you're from, and we will then try to take your question and kind of pass it along to the appropriate staff member that we have here on hand. So Linnea, I might turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So it looks like we have Tim H. who's got his hand up. So Tim, when you're ready, you can go ahead and ask your question. Or Tim from Helena, sorry about that. Yep.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, Tim Tilton from Helena. Two questions, one related to the incentives for the lowering the group size. Just wondering, will those incentives be applicable to both private floaters and outfitters? And second question relating, never mind, just that first question is all I have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. This is Colin Moss. Yeah, at this point, I believe we were just considering incentives, and they would more than likely be voluntary incentives to limit your group sizes or reduce your group sizes to private floaters. We haven't discussed that, from my knowledge, with outfitters quite yet.
Is there anyone else, any other staff who wants to jump in on that, or? Okay, Tim, does that answer your question?
Yes, just would, I'll make a comment through the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Doherty, you're next.
Thanks. My name's Sarah Doherty from Missoula.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks.
I guess I have a couple questions. Number one would be, does the random number generator always put Missoula people last? And then, just kidding. Do the other permitted rivers have limitations on who cannot apply? And how do they handle their cancels? Like the salmon system or Colorado system?
Yes, unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with a lot of the other rivers. I haven't had a whole lot of time to research that. I fully intend to, because rather than reinventing the wheel, oftentimes it is much easier to look to see what other river systems are doing. One river system that we did have been looking at is the Grand Canyon National Park, the Colorado River. And, they've got a pretty good system that they implemented several years ago to, I believe, to kind of take the place of their old wait list that they used to have. And I believe it's more of a weighted lottery type system. But there again, unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to research other systems to know exactly what everybody else is doing.
It seems like we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel on the cancel system or the permit system when there's multiple other rivers that already have a system that seems like it works.
I can jump in on that too. It's a really good suggestion there. With the management plan update, it's gonna, when we finalize it, it'll give us some good guidance direction going forward, fully intending then that the details and implementation are yet to come. But I think your suggestion's a good one. And I suspect we will be doing exactly that.
Sar, do you have any other questions you wanted to ask while you're on?
How do you get on the PAC? Or is that a closed thing?
Yeah, sorry, I can speak to that a little bit. So the selection process for that started really with looking at our past advisory council for the Smith River, and then filling in kind of what we saw as potential gaps. In other words, trying to round out perspectives that we maybe didn't have with the group. We honestly have just one more meeting, and then the advisory group is going to be wrapped up with their role. And so we're kind of at the tail end right now. And so I think the best way to provide input into this process would be through the comment period.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So next in line, I have Odorous. Can you unmute yourself? Is that possible? Odorous, can you unmute yourself? I've unmuted you on my end.
Lene, you might want to explain *6 to unmute if he's on a phone.
Yeah, I don't think he's on the phone, but yes, if you are on the phone, if you dial *9, excuse me, *6 to unmute. Okay, well, we can circle back to you. Try again in a minute. Let's move to Park County Community. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Gavin from Livingston. And my question is based on incentives that you might be able to put in place for Montana residents versus out-of-state residents, similar to the hunting permits and licenses and tags. A limited amount is reserved for out-of-state versus in-state. So wondering if that has been considered at all. Thank you for holding this. This is really fantastic. Nice work.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Anecdotally, over the years, I hear that every year, with folks saying, gosh, is there any way, that residents could have preference over non-residents, and people asking what the numbers look like as far as the number of non-residents versus residents who apply, but also who draw. I will say, my lead river ranger did a great job. He did put up some nice information for me this morning with some graphs that does show that the number, both the number of non-residents and the number of non-residents or number of non-residents applying and the number of non-residents actually floating the river and drawing permits is increasing. It's gone up from about 20% into the 30%, mid 30% for both of those numbers roughly. When we were discussing this issue, we didn't specifically, as you saw, put anything about restricting non-residents, but it will be interesting to see when we do finish and get through all the comments. I suspect we will see some of those comments come in about, hey, is there a way we can give preference to residents? But at this point, we haven't, as I mentioned, put that into the draft environmental assessment.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't see any other people. Oh, here, let's try odorous again.
All right, how about now?
Yep, we can hear you great.
All right, I had my mute thing all messed up. Thank you for your time. I had a question about the human waste deal. How would you guys implement, like, basically like how you check the bear boxes and all that stuff? Would you be going through a gear check on that? And more specifically, making, what ways could people use that? Like in a lot of rivers, people use wag bags, which, with the river with the Smith, which would probably be a bad idea with so many people. So, you know what I mean? So like, how would you implement seeing what people have and blah, 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 blah? Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Good question. Colin Moss again. Yeah, we haven't finalized the exact method quite yet. It could be one or a combination of more than one methods. And so we have recognized the fact that, a lot of rivers do use groovers or hard-sided containers for human waste. And those systems do work well for groups, rafters, and, you can put them in canoes typically too, but groups that are raft supported. And we recognize the fact that as the years go on, we're seeing more and more kind of lean and mean, those lightweight groups that go down and either kayaks or little individual kick boats that wouldn't necessarily maybe have the means to, or the support to carry groovers. So we're also considering and looking at, well, we may have to make an exception for some of those types of groups to allow bags type systems. And we would have to make that really clear during, when we do finalize which methods we're going to allow, who's allowed to use which methods. And then some of the issues come up with the disposal at the other end at Eden Bridge. When it comes to groovers, there are things called, I'm having a brain lapse here. A system that can wash out your groover, and wag bags can be a little trickier because those depending on the number of bags, they are fairly odorous, and I don't know if we probably have to find some sort of containment system for those at Camp Baker. Also, to answer your first question, yes, we would do some checking, some gear checks to make sure that groups were in compliant with whatever system that we come up with.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, that does. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Sar, your hand is up. Do you have another question, or is that from earlier?
No, I do have another question just in regards to the cancel system. Again, I had heard rumors that you may be thinking of getting rid of the call system. and what would be replacing that? And then as far as the cancel system, again, it seems like instead of not issuing cancels, it seems like maybe a better alternative is to limit the group size on the cancels. So I guess my main question is, what's the plan, how to pick up a cancel permit?
Sure, sorry, I can take that one. You know, the department is in the process of developing a new licensing system called Explore MT. At this point, and if Mike Vleski with the director's office is still on, he might be able to answer this question much better, because I'm not real super close to this, but I think at this point, we're not sure what the final capability of that new system is going to be. And it could help us to manage the Smith River, not only the permit system, but also, you know, after the initial permits and after the initial drawing, as far as the ability to pick up permits. With that said, we have also recognized the importance and the value of having a person that you can talk to on another line. And so, you know, rather than having a one-stop shopping, for example, on an online system where floaters would do everything as far as applying and canceling and picking up cancellations, we still think it's very important, at least in the region here, that we're going to have to try to build maybe into whatever system we come up with, still having that one-on-one personal touch with a human you can talk to. And because there's so many nuances, as you may know, SAR, to floating the Smith River, and we get so many questions on you name it, on everything from planning their trip to the end of the trip, all the way through. So we're not quite there yet. It's kind of still one of those things that we need, you know, we're kind of waiting to see what our capabilities can be and what's going to work best for both us, but especially the public, for public service.
Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. Otis, do you have a follow-up question? Or is-
I'm good. Do I still have my hand up? Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry
no
about
problem.
that.
No problem.
I got a million questions in my head, but I can't spit them out. No, I'm good right now. Thank you.
Okay. Just raise your hand if you have another question. We do still
got
have
it.
quite a bit of time. If people have questions, don't be shy, raise your hand, and we will be happy to answer your questions. Sarah, is your hands up from before?
Yeah, I think it's up from
Okay.
before.
Okay, thanks. So anyone else have some questions for our staff here?
Well, maybe Linnea, thank you so much for helping to facilitate this. Since we do have a little time, I know we do have several staff, but also some planning advisory committee members with us. And so just maybe this is a little bit of a window to offer up folks to add anything that they would maybe like to reinforce in front of everybody. Colin has done a great job, I think, of walking through at a really high level, kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Is there anybody from FWP that would like to add anything further? Okay, quiet group. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, just it's worth saying, and hopefully my connection doesn't come out here or cut out here. It's cut out several times on me. There are a number of things that we're trying to outline here as possibilities, and we're not hiding the ball by not picking those specifically at this point or providing all the details. It's simply that we know we have more checking to do and more public comment to take to help us really narrow in on what the solutions are. But then when the time comes, there will be a number of those actions that are going to require park board approval. And so that will be yet another opportunity to comment on the real specifics of some of those actions. Some actions are going to require board approval, and some are going to be ministerial and the department can handle. But either way, particularly with the parks board, when there are things that we will be contemplating the bigger decisions, there will be another opportunity for public comment and for folks to weigh in on those.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Odorous, did you have another question?
Yes, ma'am. So to piggyback on the gentleman's question earlier, he brought up about the like the early season April stuff with like incentives for smaller groups, and he made a good point about is that the same with the outfitters? Because we've all been on plenty of trips where they're maxed out, or I've seen some where they only have a few guys. But how would you keep? That's a good point he brought up. How would you keep that fair as far as if you got whatever you did anyways, and then all of a sudden you see a group of 15 going down with an outfitter, and you got the other 7 groups with 4-man groups. I mean, does that make sense? How would that? How would you take care of that issue, I guess?
Yeah, so I hear maybe a couple of questions. One is just simply around kind of the timing, that spring season.
Right.
And that was definitely referenced in their environmental assessment document, as well as in kind of group size and maybe kind of the distinction between treatment around private floats versus the outfitters. I might turn this over to Colin. Again, we might reinforce, just as Mike has stated, we're really just starting to examine a lot of these issues and possibilities. We're kind of throwing these things out as ideas right now that we're evaluating. And so I'm not sure how much specificity we're going to be able to offer you right now, to be completely candid. But I might turn it over to Colin or other colleagues of mine here who could speak to that a little bit further.
Sure.
Yeah, Odorous, it's, well, I guess as far as the incentives, and trying to, reduce the impacts that we see in the early season. Typically that's during the month, for the most part, the month of April. Usually by the time we get into early May, things have usually dried out and things are stabilizing a little better. And so at this point, we don't have any commercial trips that actually are conducted in the month of April. They typically will start their trips usually right around the 1st or 2nd week of May. But there again, we did not, for the purposes of this EA, propose anything that would include the outfitters. It's interesting, the outfitters are allocated 73 launches throughout the season. On average, I think over the years, they end up using about 47 of those. Sometimes they get into the low to mid 50s. One year, I think they use 62 of their 73. But again, that's something we haven't addressed. And I'm sure we'll probably see comments about that in the comment section. Mike, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just that I think it's very likely that if we should adopt something that, say, for instance, mandates decreased group size, we'd rather approach it through incentives. But if we should mandate something like that, for instance, I would think that we would, what's good for one is good for the other, and we would that mandate would apply percentage wise to a outfitted opportunity as well.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally did. And great point, Colin, because I knew that with the outfitters, they're not starting, there until May or whatever. And I totally spaced on that. But I get, black and white on that. And good point, though. I get the April thing. I'm good. That was a good answer. Thank you.
All right, thanks for your question.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I want to also offer up an opportunity to any of our planning advisory committee members. I know there's a few of you on here. Is there anything else that you would like to add or have questions about yourself? All right, well, hearing none, I think we are kind of at the finish line then with our evening. I want to, in closing, thank everybody for participating. We know your time is valuable. We're so fortunate to have an audience here who has a lot of love for this treasured resource. And just would encourage you, if you do have a comment, to please submit it by our December 15th deadline. We have also the opportunity, of course, to submit written comments, and those can be addressed to me here in Helena. The address is on this PowerPoint slide. It is also on our webpage. And if there are any further questions about the process or kind of what we're up to, you can certainly reach out to my colleague, Dave Hagengruber, who also walked you through kind of the commenting process. We've already gotten, again, a number of comments, and I just want to thank those of you, if you're out there, for your input. Again, it is extremely valuable to us. And thank you for your participation in today's Zoom. These were all great questions. There were no questions disguised as comments, which I want to applaud everybody for. And I think we can just call it a wrap. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. We look forward to hearing more from you about this really important issue. Good night.